They say jealousy is born from desire, but what happens when that desire rises in heaven itself? Before time began, there was one who shone brighter than the stars, whose voice echoed like the sound of many waters. Yet within that brilliance, something dark began to grow. Was Lucifer jealous of God's throne? Did the morning star want more than his place among the angels? Stay with me, because what began as admiration soon turned into rebellion, and the echo of that choice still reaches us today. Welcome to Divine War Stories, where we uncover the hidden truths behind heaven's greatest battles. If you're new here, subscribe and join this journey through the unseen wars of eternity, where every story leads us back to Christ. Here we don't just explore the past, we learn how these celestial lessons still shape our souls today. In the beginning, Lucifer was not a creature of darkness, he was light itself. His name meant morning star, and his beauty reflected the majesty of the one who created him. But as he looked upon his own brilliance, something subtle whispered within, "You deserve more." Pride took root in admiration, turning worship into comparison. It wasn't God's power he first desired, it was his position. The same way humanity often looks at others and wonders, "Why not me?" Lucifer's heart echoed that very thought. Yet in heaven, envy is not just a feeling, it's rebellion against perfection itself. Lucifer's jealousy wasn't about gold or thrones, it was about authority. He wanted to sit where only holiness could dwell, to rule where only pure love could reign. The throne of God wasn't just a seat, it was the center of righteousness, the heart of divine order. But Lucifer saw it as something to take, not something to revere. Just like Adam and Eve, who reached for knowledge not given to them, Lucifer reached for glory that wasn't his to hold. Pride always disguises itself as ambition, and ambition without obedience becomes destruction. Imagine being surrounded by light so perfect that there is no shadow, until you create one. Lucifer, filled with splendor, began to question why he should serve when he could lead. His music once filled the heavens with harmony, but now his melody turned inward, praising his own beauty. It's the same when our hearts seek applause instead of purpose, when worship turns from the Creator to the self. In that moment, the most beautiful angel became the first deceiver. But here's where this story touches us. Jealousy didn't start on earth, it started in heaven. Every time we crave control, recognition, or superiority, we mirror that ancient rebellion. Lucifer's fall wasn't just a cosmic event, it was a warning written in eternity. The enemy didn't lose his place because he wasn't powerful. He lost it because he stopped being humble. And Christ calls us to the opposite path. Whoever wants to be greatest must be the servant of all. When Jesus came, he reversed Lucifer's pattern. Where the fallen one exalted himself, Christ humbled himself, even to the cross. He showed that true glory isn't taken, it's given by the Father. The humility of Christ stands as heaven's answer to Lucifer's pride. That's why holiness isn't about perfection, it's about surrender. It's not about climbing higher but kneeling lower. The battle for holiness is the war for the heart. And Christ already showed us how to win it. Lucifer saw the throne and wanted it for power. Jesus saw the throne and gave it up for love. That's the difference between rebellion and redemption. Holiness, in its essence, is walking in alignment with that same love. Turning from sin not because we're afraid of punishment but because we don't want distance from God. The enemy wants separation, Christ desires restoration. And though we fail daily, His grace continues to call us closer. Every act of pride, every small rebellion in our thoughts, repeats a piece of Lucifer's fall. That's why Jesus calls us to die daily, to crucify the self that wants to rise above God. Holiness isn't about being flawless, it's about fighting the urge to be our own gods. Lucifer wanted to ascend, Christ descended. One reached upward in arrogance, the other downward in mercy, and that's what saved us. When we think about sin, we often see it as something external, a list of wrongs to avoid. But sin began as a thought in a perfect being. It shows how dangerous pride truly is. It blinds, it corrupts, and it isolates. Lucifer didn't lose heaven because God hated him. He lost it because he couldn't bear to love God more than himself. And every time we choose self over surrender, we echo his story. But in Christ, there's always a chance to start again. So how do we live differently? By letting Christ sit where he belongs, in the center. When we place him above our desires, jealousy dies. When we honor others, pride loses power. That's the life of holiness, not spotless but surrendered. Christ never asked us to be divine, he asked us to reflect the divine. Holiness is not isolation, it's imitation, imitating the one who loved when he could have condemned. Lucifer's jealousy ended in eternal separation, but our humility can lead to eternal connection. That's the great paradox of heaven. The lower we bow, the higher we rise. The world tells you to chase your own throne, but Christ whispers, "Follow me." And in that following we find freedom, not from weakness but from self. The same light Lucifer once reflected now shines in every heart that surrenders to the sun. Lucifer's fall reminds us that beauty without obedience leads to ruin. He was adorned with wisdom and light, yet his heart turned against the very source of that light. It's a reflection of what happens when blessings become idols, when the gifts God gives us make us forget the giver himself. That's why Jesus taught that whoever wants to save his life must lose it. True life begins where self ends. Holiness isn't about shining on our own, it's about reflecting his light faithfully. And when we stop reflecting, the darkness we create is our own shadow. When humanity fell in Eden, we repeated the same question that began in Lucifer's heart: can I be like God? The serpent's lie wasn't random, it was recycled pride. But Christ came to rewrite that story, not by grasping for divinity, but by surrendering his glory. He became man not to prove superiority but to reveal servanthood. That's the lesson Lucifer refused to learn. Greatness in God's kingdom comes through humility. It's not about sitting on thrones, it's about washing feet. The more we chase power, fame, and recognition, the more we drift toward that same rebellion. But when we choose humility, we draw closer to heaven's heart. Holiness isn't built overnight, it's formed in quiet decisions, in forgiveness, in patience, in love that costs us something. Every small act of obedience echoes louder in eternity than the songs of pride. And though we can't be perfect, Christ covers our imperfection with his mercy, shaping us through grace, not fear. Lucifer's jealousy led to division, but Christ's humility leads to unity. The church, when truly centered on him, is the opposite of that rebellion. It's a body, not a hierarchy of pride. Each person, no matter how small their role, reflects part of God's glory. That's why being part of a community of faith matters. We weren't called to follow Christ alone, we were called to be his reflection together. When believers serve the poor, comfort the broken, and care for the forgotten, heaven recognizes that as true worship. The throne Lucifer wanted to steal is now the throne Christ invites us to approach, through grace, not arrogance. We don't ascend to it, we're welcome to it. But to approach that throne, our hearts must bow. That's why holiness can never be prideful, it must be dependent. It's not a trophy we earn but a transformation we receive. Jesus didn't command holiness to burden us but to protect our souls from corruption. He knows that sin doesn't just break rules, it breaks hearts, families, and futures. When Christ calls us to walk in holiness, he's not demanding perfection, he's inviting connection. He knows our weaknesses, our doubts, our scars, and still he says, "Be holy as I am holy." Not because we can match his nature but because we're being shaped by his Spirit. Holiness is not distance from the world, it's presence with purpose. It's living in the world without belonging to its darkness, letting our choices whisper to others that God is real, and his love still transforms. If Lucifer's story teaches anything, it's that sin begins where gratitude ends. The moment we forget who gave us everything, pride sneaks in and poisons the soul. But Jesus teaches us to give thanks in all things, to find joy in humility, and strength in surrender. That's why holiness is the path of gratitude, it's living in awareness of God's goodness. The enemy wants us to believe that obedience limits freedom, but the truth is, obedience protects it. Christ sets us free not to rebel but to love more deeply. The world will tell you that holiness is outdated, that sin is just self-expression. But look at what sin truly does. It isolates, destroys trust, and breeds emptiness. Lucifer wanted to be free from God and found himself chained by pride. Christ, on the other hand, submitted to the Father and was exalted above all names. That's the paradox of heaven's kingdom. Surrender leads to victory. Every no to sin is a yes to peace. Every time we choose humility over ego, we push back the darkness that once began in heaven. So when Christ commands us to live holy lives, he's not demanding the impossible. He's inviting us into wholeness. He doesn't want perfection, he wants transformation. Holiness means letting God purify our motives, our desires, and our love until they align with his. It's becoming more like Christ, not by trying harder but by surrendering deeper. He cares for your soul more than anything you could achieve or own. That's why he calls us away from sin, because sin doesn't just offend God, it wounds the very heart he came to heal. So if this message spoke to you, don't let it end here. Open the scriptures, read them daily, not as a rule book but as a love letter from the God who still calls you higher. Find a church that truly preaches Christ, that serves the poor, helps the orphan and the widow, and lives the message it proclaims. Because holiness is not found in isolation, it's revealed in compassion. If Lucifer's jealousy divided heaven, let Christ's humility unite our hearts. Subscribe to Divine War Stories to keep discovering these eternal battles and how they echo in our lives today. And remember, Christ didn't call you to be perfect, He called you to be His.